I think that the biggest difference between a lot of sort of authors who haven't started and those who have published something is those who haven't started sometimes are sitting and waiting for the perfect idea to arrive, packaged, tied up, ribbon, and you think, well, I'm going to get the idea, then I'll write a proposal and I'll sell it and then I'll write the book. And this is the path of traditional publishing and nonfiction, right? You propose your idea and then you write the book. Real writers know that writing is messy. It's rarely completely linear, that you have to be engaged in the work before the ideas crystallize. And, sometimes for me, I will just dive into writing chapters and seeing where it takes me and then throwing away my outline and restarting and writing because I just can't think about it deeply enough until I'm really engaged in it. Ideas don't just settle from the universe into my head for here's your book, now start writing. I have to wrestle with it and have false starts. And I think it's okay to give ourselves permission to do that. For me, I know it's part of my process. And so I welcome it.
If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard me and Josh talk about MWI, which is our digital marketing agency. If you're new around here, this may be a first introduction to MWI. We're a full-service digital marketing agency that specializes in everything from website design and development to search engine optimization and all forms of paid advertising, whether it's paid social advertising or paid search advertising, content marketing, digital PR, social media management. Basically anything a business needs to strengthen and grow their digital footprint is what we do over at MWI. The website is mwi.com. And for any listeners of the Hope Strategy podcast, I'd love to offer a free 20-minute consultation with yours truly to talk about your business, to talk about your goals, to understand, what you need to be doing from a digital marketing strategy and action plan standpoint in order to yield some results and grow your business online. So please reach out at mwi.com/hope strategy. That's mwi.com/hope strategy to sign up, and we will be in touch. Now back to the show.
Welcome to the Hope Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Steinley. Corey Blake is out today. And our guest today is Ann Janzer. She's an award-winning author, nonfiction writing coach, and marketing practitioner on a mission to help people make a positive impact with their writing. She supports and encourages writers, authors, and marketers through her books, blog posts, online courses, webinars, and teaching. That's the official introduction. I already interviewed Ann once before for my other podcast, the Published Author Podcast. And Ann was such a good guest, and she had so much knowledge about the writing process that I wanted to bring her on to the Hope Strategy Podcast to talk a bit about how writing can give us hope. And also, she's giving hope to people who want to write. Some of Ann's books are The Writer's Process, The Workplace Writer's Process. She's not just an author, she's an expert on writing and on being an author. And so that's part of why we wanted her to be on the show. And if you're looking to be an author, and I mean that in the most broad definition. So we talk on the episode about to be an author, you don't necessarily even have to publish a book. Maybe you want to write a book just for your family, just so that they know who you are and they know what your life story is. That's great. We talk about that. Maybe you want to write a book because you want to get a message out there and you want it to be traditionally published and be a New York Times bestseller. We talk about that too. And everything in between. We talk about blogging and social media, all types of writing, although we do talk predominantly about books. So we also talk about how writing can bring hope to people. It can bring hope to you as a writer, and it can also bring hope to other people that you're sharing your message with. So if you've ever wanted to be a writer, you've ever wanted to be an author, you've ever wanted to write a book for yourself or for your family or for others, then there's a bunch of great content here, and I'll let you get to it.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley.
With everybody that we have on the show, we like to get some background information, get your personal story. So, Anne, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, how you grew up, and let's dig into that backstory a little bit.
Yeah, how I grew up. I grew up in a family of book nerds, readers, which probably influenced my ultimate destination here in the Midwest. Very, normal, vanilla kind of Midwestern upbringing. Well, probably not entirely normal. My mom ran an opera theater out of the house when I was growing up, and my father
is not normal. I can tell you that is not normal.
The funny thing is, as a kid, you're like, yeah, it's a little weird, but everyone's parents do weird things. It's like, well, maybe not. But I spent most of my career in marketing, which is interesting. I know that a lot of, you've got the background. A lot of people start in marketing and go off into other places, or start in other places and go to marketing. That's the kind of discipline it is. It's really useful as an interdisciplinary kind of thing. And I was specifically, though, I was writing for all sorts of different brands. I was writing in the voice of different brands. And it was only about 6 or 7 years ago that I thought, I'm going to try to write a book, something I always wanted to do, but never felt enough. I never felt expert enough, or I don't know, like I had the credentials, or like anyone would read it, or nobody knew who I was. I mean, I just never felt enough to do that. And I got past that in part because I have a really wonderful, supportive spouse who looked at me and said, yeah, you could definitely write a book. Yes, you will definitely have value to other people. And that was really a wonderful gift that he gave me. And I haven't really looked back since then. I wrote the first book. I enjoyed that so much. I've kept writing books ever since, and am just really enthused about helping other people find their path towards expressing their ideas in the world, whether that's through a book or other forms of writing.
So for those joining us, I've interviewed Anne before. She was on my other podcast, the Published Author Podcast. We talked a lot about her books and the research she's done. Give us a little bit of history of your anthology, your books that you've written, and why you wrote each one, what each one is about.
So the first one was about marketing, which was my background, and more specifically about marketing for a subscription-based business. And I wrote that one because I just had a sense I wanted to share this idea with the world that I felt that marketers were ignoring, which is, hey, when we move to a subscription model, it's no longer about selling widgets. It's no longer about transactions. Marketing has suddenly changed. It's about relationships. And unless you change your marketing methodologies, you are going to eventually be either left in the dust or be increasingly irrelevant to your business and your business's revenues. But this was a real opportunity to put ourselves into our customers' minds and become part of a valued, become an important part of their life, offer value beyond just the widget or the service or that we're selling, but to think about the whole experience and relationship. So that was the origin of that book. And then I made a little pivot to writing about writing. And my next 4 books have all been about writing. So clearly I've been enjoying that, looking at the psychology of writing, whether that's the psychology of what's happening in the writer's head, which is what I wrote about in the book called The Writer's Process, or what's happening in the reader's head, which is what I wrote about in a book called Writing to be Understood, What Works and Why. So I keep just diving into different little aspects of writing as a form of communication, of writing as a form of connecting with other people, looking at the research, looking at the stories people had to share, doing some research myself and saying, what can I put out there that's going to help other writers be more effective in making these connections? Because writing ultimately is one way that we as people can connect with each other, right? That we can communicate, that we can make a link. We've all experienced this reading a book or a poem or something, and we just read something and say, oh, I am totally get what this author's saying. I feel this connection with this piece of writing. And that's what a gift. What a gift to be able to connect with people that aren't present to you, that aren't right here with you, that we're not looking at face to face.
Can anybody write a book? I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot, right? My dad just emailed me today. He said, I want to write this book. What do you think of this idea? And I've heard some people say everybody's got a book in them. And then I've heard other people say, just because you want to write a book doesn't mean you should write a book. What are your thoughts on should everybody write or should just certain people write?
Okay, so let's parse apart writing in two ways. So there's writing that we do for ourselves. And I believe that, if this comes to you, we should all write for ourselves. I think there's enormous power in journaling, in telling our own stories, in crafting our own narratives of our lives. And in that sense, I would say, yes, hallelujah, absolutely. Everyone write, whether it's a book or a journal or it could be a blog for your family. There's a lot of value for people writing books for their families too. These, this sort of people sharing their experiences. I know there's a whole memoir thing of people who just want to share it for their families. They just want to say, I'm putting together my experiences, my stories. Those stories are golden. So yes, everyone can write a book. Not everyone can write a book that will sell. The question is, when you publish the book, what are your objectives? As you well know, just writing a book is just one part. You're maybe halfway through your author journey when you've published, maybe, that if you want the book to have an impact on other people, then you have to think more carefully about what you're doing. So are you writing for yourself or are you writing for others? That's the fundamental question to look at. Now, if you're writing for others, then you have to approach it differently. You have to think a little more carefully. You don't just get put in everything that comes to mind that needs to go in. You need to think about the needs of your readers and what you're trying to achieve for them and how to do that. And then how do you get this book into their hands? So that becomes a whole different set of projects. So your answer is anyone can write a book. And if their goals are simply to share the two personal goals or family goals, go for it. In terms of putting a book out into the world and publishing and hoping to make an impact, not everyone is going to achieve that. And it's a lot more work. It's a different kind of project. But that said, I'm not one of these people who wants to simply discourage people from doing it. No, it's already been said, don't write it. That's not at all what I want to say. No, just approach it differently. Say you have a unique lens. What are other people going to find valuable in that lens? What can you give to readers that others can't? How are you showing up differently? How do you provide your message differently? And this is true of fiction and nonfiction as well. Yeah.
Right, because everybody's life is different. There are no two lives that are the same. So even if you're writing the same book, it's going to come through differently, even if you're talking about ostensibly the same stuff, right?
And that's as long as you are not just sitting and spitting out a bunch of points, but really writing the book, really going on the journey of understanding and sharing and learning and growing, then yes, whatever comes out will be uniquely yours. Yeah.
So one part of the writing process, well, I like to say there are three tough parts of the writing process: getting started, the part in the middle, and then finishing it. All of those are hard. But a lot of people struggle with getting started. And of course, if you don't get started, you never get to struggle with the other parts. Through the research that you've done, talking to authors, writing your books, have you found any tricks or tips or hints on how writers can overcome that initial part of just how do I get started? How do I put pen to paper? How do I type that first page? Where do I start?
Right. So I think that the biggest difference between a lot of sort of authors who haven't started and those who have published something is those who haven't started sometimes are sitting and waiting for the perfect idea to arrive, packaged, tied up, ribbon tied, And you think, well, I'm going to get the idea, then I'll write a proposal and I'll sell it, and then I'll write the book. And this is the path of publishing and traditional publishing and nonfiction, right? You propose your idea and then you write the book. Real writers know that writing is messy. It's rarely completely linear, that you have to be engaged in the work before the ideas crystallize. So the nonfiction writers that I've worked with have first blogged extensively about their topic, or they've spoken about their topic. They've been engaging with it in multiple ways. And, sometimes for me, I will just dive into writing chapters and seeing where it takes me, and then throwing away my outline and restarting and writing, because I just can't think about it deeply enough until I'm really engaged in it. Ideas don't just settle from the universe into my head for here's your book, now start writing. I have to wrestle with it and have false starts. And I think it's okay to give ourselves permission to do that. In fact, for me, I know it's part of my process. And so I welcome it. Say, I'm going to write a while and I'll probably throw out half of what I do. You have to stop clinging to the words that you've produced. Let them flow. Don't try to perfect them, because you might toss them, or you might keep them and make them a beautiful part of something new.
This has been so hard for me too. I tend to edit as I write, which is dangerous as a book writer, because you really do need to get it all out there. One of the terms I love is when people call your first draft your vomit draft. It's a big mess. You get it all out there and then you clean it up. And I feel like that really encapsulates a healthy writing process, because getting it all out is so key to then being able to go back and say, now, what do I want to keep? What do I want to leave for later? What do I want to eliminate from this book? But if you don't get it all out there in the first place, it's really hard to go through that process, because you're trying to finesse things so much as you write the book. I think a lot of people try to write their final draft as their first draft. And that is the hard way to write a book, isn't it?
It's a painful, painful way to write a book. And what happens is you either waste a whole lot of time perfecting something that is later going to be cut, right? And then you'll hate the editor. This is one reason why authors have such an issue sometimes with their editors. Like, oh, they made me cut this section and it was fantastic. Or worse, you have control and you leave it in and it doesn't serve the reader. So I do some developmental editing of nonfiction books, and I'm reading one now, and it's filled with wonderful stuff. But I'm like, this section here, they aren't serving the main message of this book. They're wonderful. Maybe they'll be in their own book, but they shouldn't be here. So I'm not going to put line edits in it. That would be a waste of my time. I'm not going to, we should not polish this. We should put it aside lovingly. Stephen King says, kill your darlings. It's like, well, no, don't kill them. Just give them another home for a while. Move them, relocate your darlings somewhere else, and you may find where they belong. But polishing as you go, the other issue with that, as you know, Josh, is that it brings that critical, editorial eye, which we need, into the process of getting the draft down. And it's really easy to end up in a sort of self-critical pattern like this. It's going to shut down your creativity or your flow. You'd be like, I can't believe I used that word. Or why am I saying some all the time? And I call myself a writer. What kind of nouns? I don't even use any active verbs. What a terrible writer I am. It's like, no, this is not the time to have those conversations when you're trying to get ideas out. You get them out as you think. This comes back to that fundamental dichotomy that you asked about early. Should everyone write a book? Are you writing for yourself or are you writing for others? When you're doing the first draft, it will be most painless if you just let it flow out in the way that makes sense for you and the way that you think, the way that you write. And then you edit, you decide what belongs in there. That's where you bring in more, again, the lens of the other person and what your reader needs, what they're expecting when they open this book, what promise you've made, and are you delivering on that promise?
How do you know when your book is done? How do you know when you should move on to the next thing? And there's a quote I want to read from Winston Churchill that I love about this. He says, writing a book is an adventure to begin with. It is a toy and an amusement. then it becomes a mistress, and then it becomes a master, and then a tyrant. The last phase is that just as you are about to be reconciled to your servitude, you kill the monster and fling him out to the public.
Ha! I love that quote. Winston Churchill just could not speak in a way that was not highly quotable. Yeah. So my only problem with that is that, maybe that reflected, if you're Winston Churchill in publishing, you could just fling it out in the public and it would go. But you and I don't have the same readership as Winston Churchill. So in fact, we are not done at the moment of publication, but we are continuously trying to build readership. I just finished a big book promotion for a book of mine called The Writer's Process, which I published in 2016. And I just spent the last several weeks doing a large promotion to sort of expand the readership of it, because that's what we do. If we believe that the audience if the message has value to an audience, we continue to work to get that message out. We're not done. I think that we are serving not the book, as Winston Churchill said, although it's a very funny quote, but hopefully, ideally, we are serving our audiences. We are serving the people who are going to find value in that book. And so that service, we can choose to walk away from it and often, we walk away. We're always juggling other things. I mean, there may be some new book that we want to work on and we're excited about that message. So it's not like you have to get up every day and think about all of your books and what are you doing for them, because we go nuts if you have more than one book. But we are serving the audience and not the books. So that's just, and balancing your life and doing all of those things that we have to do. But when you serve the audience, when you have this sense that the book that you're writing is going to make a difference somewhere, when you have a little bit of hope about it, that is what fuels your activities writing and your activities beyond the book itself.
We live in a different age today with technology and the speed at which we can do things, but we're still, as authors, we're a little bit prisoner to the history of book publishing. As we think about book publishing 100 years ago, it was a time-intensive, labor-intensive process. And by the time you got a book finished and printed, that was probably all you wanted to do. That's all the publisher wanted to do. But today, I have one of the people I interviewed for my other podcast. She wrote, edited, and published her book in 2 weeks. And now it wasn't perfect. And she spent a lot of time during those 2 weeks. That's all she did. But still, 2 weeks to go from writing to publishing a book is incredible. And it's only possible because of technology and Amazon and print on demand. But she was able to do that. And for her, she said, yeah, there are mistakes in the book. There are typos. I find things, but it's not that big a deal. And the speed was more essential. And she knew she could go back and change those things and fix it at any time and then just reprint the book. No big deal. Well, 100 years ago, that was a big deal. But today, it's pretty easy. And there are all these other ways to write where you don't have to publish a book. You can put it out there on a blog. You can put it on Medium. You can do it through social media. We can write in so many different ways, and we can update that. So for example, right now I'm working on a workbook on how to write a book. It's all in a Google Doc. And when I first release it, I'm just going to release the Google Doc before I do the printed book, because that way I can get people reading it. I can get feedback. I'll get the crowdsourced wisdom editing my book for me and showing me where the typos are. This is something we couldn't have done maybe even just 10, 15 years ago. You couldn't do this, but today it's so easy to do. But a lot of times we're still locked into this idea that I'm writing a book. It's a big deal. Once it's printed, it's all over. I can never go back and fix it. And I wonder how often that keeps authors from publishing, because they say, no, I need to refine it. I need to refine it. I need to make it better. I need to make it better. It's not ready yet. And then 10 years go by and the book never gets published because they were trying to make it 100% perfect rather than saying, you know what, 98% is good enough.
We all need to educate ourselves about the world of publishing today. And I know that a lot of really, so there's an author called David Burkus. He writes a lot of business books. And during this pandemic, early on in the pandemic, he was going to do a book, and he decided, you know what? I'm just going to do an audiobook. He released it himself, and he's traditionally published otherwise, but he did an audiobook because he said it's short. My publishers want long stuff. I really wanted to get this message out, and he just published it as an audiobook. He said, maybe eventually I'll turn it into something bigger. And then he turned around and did a book on remote work during this pandemic, which I thought was brilliant too. So we are held hostage often by the old models of publishing, often held hostage by the thought that, well, the only real publishing is going to be with one of these big New York publishers unless I sell an agent. So I'm going to spend a year pitching an agent and a year doing this and that, So it's really important to educate ourselves on what publishing is today. And you tend to have, traditional publishing world, the online publishing world. And what's interesting to me is the people who are in between, who go back and forth, who pick and choose, who say, I'm doing this for this and that for that. I think they really have it figured out. So I'm always fascinated to talk to those folks and find out what they're doing and why. But the amount of control we have is phenomenal. Now, the second part of your question, which is, that letting it stop you, the sense that the book is a point of achievement and then it's done. Now, if you are personally paying for a print run of 10,000 books, yeah, my goodness, send it through a couple copy editors. I mean, yes, do it. Don't get it as clean as you can because you're putting a lot of money into the print. And that, in fact, right there is the reason why the traditional publishing industry, I mean, they put a lot of work up front and then they will figure out how many copies they're going to print in advance on your book. Print on demand has changed all that. And we now know that in the pandemic, even the traditional publishers were using print on demand to handle backorder books. During Black Lives Matter, they didn't have 10,000 copies of all these books lying around, so they sent them off to print on demand printers, Technology has changed that. We can make a change. I can update one of my books today and it will be live tomorrow, and any new bookstore that orders it will get the revised version in 2 days or something. So, I mean, it's a different world like that. But we are always prey to those inner gatekeepers, right? The traditional publishing world was all about gatekeepers. You had your editors or you had your agents and then the acquiring editors. And then, when it was published, it's like you had the lists determining if you were going to make the list. And if it didn't do well, then the bookstores would return them. In the world of publishing today, I think the most important gatekeepers are the inner ones. It's like, it has to be perfect or, no one's going to want to listen or, I'm not going to do it unless I can get all those traditional gatekeepers to do it. We have to look at where we are putting gatekeepers between us and what we really hope to do and really have a good chat with those gatekeepers and see how legitimate they are, see how real they are, because maybe it's really just a proxy for fear,
Yeah, we have so many limiting beliefs about ourselves and our self-worth and whether anybody will care about what we write. I'm really glad you brought up audio because there are some people out there who say, well, I don't even know how to write. So how can I write or how can I get my message out there? But you don't have to be a writer in order to write a book, or you don't have to be a writer to be an author. There are ghostwriters. I have a client right now who came and he said, I want to write a book, but I don't really know how to type. And once upon a time, maybe that would have been a challenge. But even 100 years ago, you could hire somebody and you could talk to them and they could type it out for you. And certainly today, that's even easier with automated transcription and all the tools that we have available. And so in the case of this client, we went and found a great ghostwriter and connected him with that ghostwriter. And now she's helping him to write that book. She's the expert at writing. He's the expert on his own ideas. And together, they're able to create a book that is going to help a lot of people that otherwise would not exist without that teamwork. And so I'm glad that you brought up the audio side of it. So talking about the publishing a bit more, the other side of it is that I think there's still some of us out there who feel like, well, I want to go with the traditional publishing house because they do the quality stuff and they're going to make the book so much better. But self-publishing has come a long way. What are some of your thoughts on self-publishing versus traditional publishing routes for people who want to get a book out there?
You can. So, I think of myself as an indie author. I actually think of myself as a publishing house with one really high maintenance author. That's me. So I want to produce books that are indistinguishable from the books printed by the big publishing houses, right? I am able to hire the same cover designers who have worked. They've laid off so many. I can hire my cover designer has worked for all the big publishing houses as a creative director. Check. Cover designer. Copy editor. Check. Can do that. I have a fabulous proofreader. I mean, he just finds things that no one else would find. So you can hire the professional services to do things. You can really hire a professional to do your design, or there's a number of tools for interior layout so that it's basically indistinguishable. I would say to try to. I go to my shelf and I pull off the books there and I put mine next to it and say, does this look identical? And it not, in terms of the quality of the interior, everything. I want it to look and feel just like traditionally published. And you do that by hiring some professional services, especially for things like, a cover design, things like that. Wow, cover really makes a huge difference. So you can do that. But you have to then treat it like a publisher. You have to say, okay, I'm trying to put this good product out into the market. How do I do that? How do I show up and do this as well as possible? And I think, Josh, that in some ways, indie authors can do things better than traditional publishers because we are not so beholden to the retail chain. We can do things with pricing. We can move faster. We can do a revised update. If the world changes, we can do that pretty quickly without having to go through a big expensive print run. We have so many more options at our disposal.
So connecting all of this to this overall topic of hope that this podcast focuses on, how has being able to write and publish books and get your message out there, how has that influenced your own sense or feeling of hope, or how have you used hope to produce this content? What role has hope had in that? Yeah,
so hope and writing a book are very intertwined, right? Because to set off to write a book is a big endeavor. You do it with some faith that it will find its readers, that people will find it of value. So hope is absolutely part of writing, but I have this theory that you need hope combined with process. You need to have a firm sense of, okay, this is how I'm going to do this. I'm going to show up every day and make progress, because I like to use the analogy of hope as like a fast twitch muscle, the muscles that help you jump off and do a sprint. But writing a book is much longer than a sprint. And so those muscles will tire out. So that's why I think you find people who have the beginnings of 6 different books in a drawer somewhere. They started off all full of hope of getting this done, and then boom, they ran out. They ran out of gas. So at that moment, you have hope is the time to say, okay, what's my process? Here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to show up every week. Here's how much time I'm going to allot to this. And when the hope fades, you keep working the process with some faith in that. And what happens is it feeds itself, because after a while you're like, I have, 40,000 pretty good words. I'm, 2/3 of the way through my, okay. So now I have some hope again. And now you have a little hope in the gas tank to keep you going on further. So there's hope and process in that. There's also, fundamentally, when you're writing something, it is a hopeful act. And I think this is in some ways why we've seen so many people, at least anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of people writing books during the pandemic. Yes, and my most recent book was a pandemic project as well. And on the one hand, it's a distraction. It's like, okay, I don't want to watch the grim news. I want to do something that's focused on other people and a more positive vision of the future. And that's what the book was and is for me. And I write with some hope that other people will be able to take the message and act on it. And this is all using hope not as the passive sense of hope, which is just sitting around and hoping for the best, but hope as a catalyst for action. That is where that is the way in which I am hopeful. I don't necessarily think things will always turn out for the best, but I think that we have the ability to influence them to be better. And that is my sense of hope. And that is what I'm trying to get at in my writing, is to help other people clue into this, or help other people achieve the same sense of hope with their writing. Other people realize what writing can do to connect with other people.
When you're writing a book and you're thinking, you have those doubts come along that say, nobody's going to buy this. And even if they buy it, they won't read it. And even if they read it, they won't care. They won't do anything. What do you tell yourself when those thoughts get into your head?
Yeah. So, again, so if I read it, if I write it, no one's going to buy it. Again, I just fall back on process. Well, I'm hopeful for it, so I'm going to do as much as I can to make this come true. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to support the book. I'm going to go out and talk about it. I'm going to create a professional book. So I try to, again, have faith in a well-structured, disciplined process. And, if you knew me, you'd know I'm not an ultra-disciplined person. So this is something that I have put in place around my writing and my publishing. So I have faith in the process. And then I look for those indicators that I am hitting the mark, and I try to collect them, because, there's this thing called the negativity bias, right? Which is that we give way more weight and attention and focus to potential losses and negative messages than we do to positive ones. And so I think that means we have to say, we have to collect those positive reinforcements. So if I have an early reader who says, oh my gosh, I found this chapter so helpful, sometimes I'll print that out and I'll put it in a file for a rainy day. So if I'm feeling like I got a terrible review, it's like, yeah, but this person here found it really helpful. And so I have done something good. I have met my objective. Not everyone's going to like every book that I write. Not everyone's going to find it useful. I had such a good lesson in this with my first writing book called The Writer's Process. The book has done really well and found a lot of people who have responded to me about the impact it's had on them. But I did pay for a professional review from Kirkus Reviews, and I got just the worst possible review that you could get. The
and
writer
you paid for it?
And I paid for it. I didn't end up publishing it, but it's made a good story, so that's a win. I love it, and I use the story in my recent book. So it would have been really easy to let that derail me, right? It would have been really easy to say, "Holy crap, I better not publish this thing. What am I doing?" Except I'd had those early readers who said, "No, this is really, really useful. This is really a powerful book for me." So I just went ahead and said, well, I'm just going to hope that not everybody reacts the way this person did.
Okay, now you got me curious. Did they say anything in the review that you think had merit? Like, did you read it and say, you know what, they actually are making some good points? Or did you feel like, man, like I paid for this and they're ripping my book apart and this isn't even accurate?
Well, no, I went back and looked at it recently because I wanted to write that chapter in the most recent book about it. And I just didn't feel like, I think really they maybe was a grad student who was having a really bad day, who reviewed it, right? Because they basically said, why would anybody need this book? I don't understand why anyone would buy it. It's like, okay. And then they called my writing lugubrious. I'm like, wow, I thought that meant like really mopey and depressing. So I went and I looked it up. It's like, yes, it does mean mopey and depressing. Dang, I had no idea that my writings. So it's like, I think maybe it was the mood they were in on the day that they read it and wrote the review, possibly, because no one else has ever said I'm lugubrious. So it's funny now. It is hilarious to me at this point in time. And I'm always one to, be open to constructive criticism. So I'm fine with that. I love that. But I don't think either of those pieces of criticism were constructive. Like, no one would need this book and the writing is lugubrious. Like, that's not very helpful for me.
Yeah. And yeah, that's not exactly the type of thing that you're going to put on the cover of the book.
Kirkus Reviews. Why would anyone want this book? Oh, maybe I should have. Maybe in the next edition, I'll do that.
Although who knows? You put that on the cover of a book, people might be like, I've got to buy this to see why they put this on the cover. But
exactly.
That's interesting because as an author, you have to deal with that type of criticism because if you are writing a book for yourself, of course, you don't have to deal with that. Or if you're just writing it for your family's probably going to be nice to you. But as soon as you put the book out there in the public, somebody at some point is going to leave a negative review or something that is critical of it. And for you, you've already kind of told us a little bit about how you deal with that, but tell us a little bit more, like how, if you get something negative, you're on Amazon, you see a negative review come in or something, how do you react to that? How do you try to take that in a way that it helps you rather than hurting you?
Yeah, so I have a couple tricks with this. Actually, I'm like, oh, score, good. I got a nice 1-star, because I feel like and if they were all 1 or 2 stars, I'd be distressed, right? So I want the balance of the reviews to be positive, obviously. But if they're all positive. So if you think about this, when you go to look at vacation rental, say, you want to read the positive reviews and you want to look at the negative reviews. And so if the negative
love reading
review,
1-star reviews for everything, books, everything. Those are the interesting ones.
They're interesting. They're fun. And I feel like they make the whole base of reviews look more legitimate. Right. So, I feel like the 1-star review legitimizes the positive reviews. In an interesting way. So there's that. And as astute purchasers of online things, we all know how to look at and evaluate those 1-star reviews. And sometimes it's like, this one came with a coffee stain on it. It's like, it's not my problem. Or I thought this book was going to be about thus and it's not. It's like, okay, that's not my problem. But, maybe if someone else thinks it's going to be, ultimately this person was not my audience. And it's just as valuable to me that the reviews separate the people who are not the audience from the audience. If you think of it as like I like to think of it as a bell curve, right? The traditional bell curve. If your book goes and your marketing is right for the book and it goes to 100 readers, let's say maybe 5% of those are just going to be avid fans and love it and recommend it to everyone. And maybe 5% are really going to dislike it. And of those, a couple are going to leave a negative review, so and the rest will kind of be in the middle, so yeah, that's pretty good. Or yeah, I like that chapter, or, I give it to my friend or something. So when you start to see some of those negative reviews, it means that your book is getting out there. It's getting distributed. It's, it's actually reaching an audience, including that, people at the far left of the grumpy bell curve who don't like it. And that's okay. That's totally fine. That, you look at every big author, you look at J.K. Rowling, and I bet she's got a ton of terrible reviews. She just has millions of really positive ones.
Yep. So even the best writers are going to get a negative review now and then. I love the reviews where it's like, Amazon told me I would have this book in 5 days, but it took 10 days to get here. And it's like, what does this have to do with the book and the author? But people don't know where to leave the negative review. So they just leave it on the product, even though it has nothing to do with the actual product.
Yep. And authors are crying over it. It's like, oh man, just let it go.
And this principle extends to other types of content too. If you do a blog, you're going to get negative comments sometimes. If you do social media, people are going to respond with snark and criticism. This is just something that if you put your content out there, you're going to have to deal with this. But it's, just because you get a bad review, bad comment, whatever, it doesn't mean that you should give up. Because the other thing I've noticed is for every person who leaves a review or a comment on something, there are 100, if not 1,000 people who aren't doing that. And so your sample is only the people who feel strongly enough to actually respond to it. But there are a lot of people out there who might say, oh, this is so great. And then they don't leave a review or anything. And so if you just base your opinion on the reviews, you're getting a very biased perspective on what everybody out there who's being influenced by your content really thinks about it.
Yeah, that's so important to remember, is that most of us, I mean, I have made a real point of reviewing a lot of books now because I'm an author and so I value them so much. So I am constantly posting reviews, but, most people don't. Most people don't. So that's why you have to collect all those little positive things. Even if someone sends you an email with a little story of, oh, this really made an impact. You can't say, oh, would you be willing to leave that in an Amazon review? But also file it away just for your own memory banks. Because remember, you are trying to serve a specific audience with your books. Not everybody, not the world. Good luck with the world. But if you have an audience that you understand well, then it's their feedback that you want to pay attention to and that you want to value and listen to.
Who are some of the other writers that you find to be, if I asked you, who are the writers that are the most hopeful, that have the most hopeful message, or the way that they write, the way that they put their content out there makes you feel like better about the future and like you have control over the future? Who are some of the authors or books that spring to mind?
Oh my gosh. I'm always reading. So this is a tough one. And I love reading. I'm really into reading nonfiction, but especially psychology related nonfiction. I think that makes me hopeful that we can kind of understand better how we operate and work with it. So, but I've read, there are hopeful books about the environment. There's What Would Nature Do? And The Nature of Nature are two really interesting books I read recently that kind of made me feel more optimistic, more hopeful about how we as human beings can interact with the environment in a way that is possibly less damaging. There are psychology books or business books that tie into psychology that make me hopeful that we can transform some of the way that we interact in business. I just read one, it's on my desk here, called Humor Seriously, Why Humor is a Secret Weapon in Business and Life by Jennifer Aker and Naomi Bagdonis. I love it. It makes me hopeful for entertaining business emails. I mean, people sharing what they know and have learned to all of our benefit, that whole act of nonfiction writing makes me feel a sense of hope and inspiration. I think that's why I keep turning to that as my reading, really for entertainment. I mean, I am as much a nonfiction reader for my own entertainment as for my edification.
Have you ever read a book that left you feeling like this is not a hopeful book, or this is depressing, or this is a downer, or this makes me feel worse about the future of the human race?
Yeah, I tend to probably self-select and filter those books out. It's a real issue because in my concern over the environment, I want to understand what's going on, but sometimes people who are writing to try to spur action on environmental progress do so with fear, a little bit of hope at the end, right? It's really hard to get to that. So I have trouble, and I would think that some science and environment writers need to be really careful about how they frame their message, because when we lead with fear, we tend to make the reader freeze. Fear freezes. I know a marketer will tell you this. If you want someone to not change anything, lead with fear, because then they will probably, I better not do anything. If you want people to change something, lead with hope, with a hopeful vision. You need to bring them towards something. So if we want to change behavior or policy around the environment, we're not going to do it by throwing a whole mess of data at everyone about things getting worse and worse. We're not going to do it by inciting fear. we are going to have to do it by finding a message of hope, of agency, of possibility, something that motivates action. So that's as much as I want to read and be aware of what's happening with climate change and all of that, I really am looking for those writers who can give me the facts, but also lead me forward to another place.
It's so interesting that you brought up the environment. One of our past episodes that we just published the other day is from Ellen Kelsey, and she's an author and she writes about the environment. And I might not agree with every way that she wants to fix things with the environment, but her approach is so positive and so filled with hope. And she gets into the same thing of saying, yeah, if you go negative with all the environmental stuff, then people don't want to listen to it. They tune it out and they feel like, well, it's hopeless then. Why do anything? And I felt like her approach was, hey, we can change things. We have control. We can work together. Let's find common areas that we all agree on. Let's focus on that first. And I felt like her message was so positive, and I just loved having her on the show, even though there might have been certain tactics where I said, well, I don't know if that's the best way to do things. But still, like, her method of staying positive, though, I felt like that is a winning message no matter what it is.
That's great. I'm going to go look her up right after this. But yeah, and isn't that a better conversation to have about, like, let's start arguing over tactics, right? Mm-hmm. Let's start saying, well, maybe this is more effective. These are conversations we need to have. It's a hugely complex issue. And until we're all engaged on it, we won't, it's a hugely complex series of issues. But yeah, that's, this is, I said at the beginning, I had a marketing background, and a lot of that is how do you influence and affect people? And that is very useful in all kinds of disciplines. So the marketer in me says, if you want people to take action, you've got to lead them with the benefits, what they're going to get to. And that applies to, if you're writing about something that is very important to you, like the environment, like inspiring change in behavior or policies there, a little knowledge of marketing and human behavior is very useful. So thanks for the recommendation. I'll look her up.
Check that one out. And thank you so much, Anne, for being with us here today. It's been great to talk about writing and how writing can bring hope to us. Writing can bring hope to other people. I'm struck by this idea that writing is an act of hope, like you said, and how when just the fact that somebody would write a book means that they have hope. And the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of books being published every year means there are a lot of hopeful people out there in the world. And if they have hope, maybe I can have hope too. So it's just kind of, I like the way that you said that. It's just been going around in my brain that the very act of writing something and putting it out there is a message of hope. And then when you add in social media and blogs and every other form of writing that people can engage in, that's good to see. What I'd be worried about is when people stop writing and say, it's really not worth it enough to write this blog post, this social media post, this book. When that all stops, then I'll be scared, because then I'll be saying, gee, everybody's given up. People don't think they can change anything. People don't think they have control, and they're resigned to their fate. And that would be a scary world to live in.
That's a great way to put it, Josh. I love that. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? Any last words or anything I should have asked that I didn't ask that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, nothing that you should have asked. I mean, I would go back for just a moment. For those of you who aren't thinking of writing a book, still to think about the writing for yourself, because there's a sense in which we all are constantly telling the narrative of our lives, right? We are all always constructing a story at which we are at the center. And whether you're just doing this, it's always happening in the background. If you do a little journaling or writing for yourself, or, writing a memoir, you start to bring these things out to the surface. And it's really important to take a look at what is the story that you're telling. Is it a victim story? Are you always the victim of something? Is it a story of crisis? The world is in crisis and you're always having to run and deal with it. And we all know people who appear to us as if they have these narratives in their head. Is it a heroic journey and you're on a quest to do something bigger? Is it a comedy? If your life is sort of a comedy, then when bad things happen, like you get a terrible review, you're like, oh, that's funny, plot twist, I mean, you can move on. The narrative structure that you choose for your life actually affects your experience in your life. I suspect it affects what happens. It actually affects not only how you see the world, but how you operate in the world, and therefore what happens in the world to you. So I invite you, even if you're not writing a book or even writing for other people, if you're writing for yourself, think really carefully about what kind of book, what kind of story you're telling, and maybe make a conscious choice to switch from a narrative of crisis and fear to one of hope or one of humor.
Well said. Thank you so much, Anne, for being with us here today. If people want to find you, where's the best place?
Best place is just my website, which is annejanzer.com. Don't forget the silent E on the Anne. There you can find my books and my blog posts and things like that.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us here today and talking about hope.
Thanks, Josh. It's great.
All right. There we go. We're good.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I hope you didn't have a 3 o'clock because we went a few minutes over there.
But... No. I'm good. All good.
All right.
Where are you located again?
I'm in Boston, by the way. Where are you again?
Nice. I'm on the central coast of California, so it's at noon for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So we're enjoying life out here, but I'd rather be in California as far as the weather goes. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's been, we're in a drought, which is a terrible thing. And about July, I'll be complaining if there's fires raging. But for this particular winter, it's been, it's kind of nice. It's been very pleasant. It's cold now, but it's been really nice.
Yeah. Now, my parents live in Southern California, and that's where I grew up. And every time I'm in the snow or I'm slipping on ice or something, I think, this is why everybody lives in California, even with the taxes and the mess and the fires and the earthquakes. Still, you just cannot beat that California weather.
It is awfully nice. Where in Boston? Are you actually in Boston itself or in a?
I'm about 40 minutes outside. It's a town called Acton. It's northwest.
Okay.
And it's kind of a rural area. So lots of green, lots of trees.
Yeah.
We have horses in our backyard. So
nice.
It's a lot of fun here.
I got a sister in Littleton and a brother in Sudbury. So I've been round and about.
Yeah, we're right in between the two. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking. I know I've driven through or past Acton. Yeah.
Yeah, I go running and I run into Littleton on my runs.
Yeah.
It's literally about a mile down the road is the city line. So
that's what I was thinking.
Right there. Great. That's fun.
It's a beautiful spot then. I know it's lovely. Yeah.
It is beautiful. But yeah. Well, like I said, I keep thinking about your books and what we talked about on the podcast, and I'm excited to get you back on. Maybe in about a year or something, I'll reach out again and say, all right, what's your most recent research? What are you working on now? What do you have to update us on? Because I'm sure you'll have more interesting stuff to share for the other published author podcast. So.
Definitely will. And let me know when this one goes and I'll share it widely. So.
All right. Oh, by the way, you mentioned that you do some developmental editing. Is that something that you want to do? Like you'd like more of that business, or just something you do for friends here and there or something?
No, I like a sort of a nice base level of the business, so it's, I do want to do more of it. Yeah. It needs to be a good fit, obviously, but yeah.
I'm going to send you. So I created a Google Doc. It's the published author recommended resources list. Okay. And I've got a bunch of people and links. I'm trying to mostly get people I know in there. I've linked to other people I don't know, but they come highly recommended. But if there's anything, I'm just going to send you the list or the Google Doc, and feel free to put yourself in here anywhere that you want to put yourself in. I have a section for developmental editors that is woefully underpopulated. And so if you'd like to put in a paragraph for yourself there, please do.
Sure.
And if there's anywhere else you want to put yourself, and if there's anybody else you think should be on here or any other service, please feel free to just type it in as a note or put in a comment or something. I do share this list with a bunch of people, but it's very much a work in progress. And so if you want to stick comments in there and stuff, go right ahead.
Great. Thank you. That'd be lovely. Yeah.
I don't have a single proofreader on here. It says coming soon. That's when I really need to get somebody in.
All right. I'll ask my proofreader if he's interested. I know he does a ton of corporate work, but boy, is he good. I mean, this guy, he's good.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to send that over to you right now. And then this episode, it'll come out. I'm not sure how backed up we are. I think we've got 5 or 6 episodes and we're just doing one a week. So it'll be a few weeks, but when it comes out, we'll send you an email with graphics and swipe copy and all that stuff.
Perfect. Probably sometime in April or something. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Maybe same time I get my vaccine or something. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Ann. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah. Great talking to you. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy Podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.